Hello, friends. We are back with Jonas and the Giver, and we are finding out today what it's like when the Giver transmits memories to Jonas, who is the receiver of memory, but will someday be the giver of memories. And remember last time the Giver was talking about, he made a reference to snow and sledding, and it was like a metaphor, but he realized Jonas didn't know what snowing and sledding was. So he is going to transmit that memory so Jonas knows of what it is he's talking about. So here we go. Jonas felt nothing unusual at first. He felt only the light touch of the old man's hands on his back. He tried to relax, to breathe evenly. The room was absolutely silent, and for a moment Jonas feared that he might disgrace himself, now on the first day of training, by falling asleep. Then he shivered. He realized the touch of the hands felt suddenly cold. At the very same instant, breathing in, he felt the air change, and his breath was cold. He licked his lips, and in doing so, his tongue touched the suddenly chilled air. It was very startling, but he was not frightened at all now. He was filled with energy, and he breathed again, feeling the sharp intake of frigid air. Now, too, he could feel cold air swirling around his entire body. He felt it blow against his hands where they laid at his sides and over his back. The touch of the man's hands seemed to have disappeared. Now he became aware of an entirely new sensation. Pinpricks? No, because they were soft and without pain. Tiny, cold, feather-like feelings peppered his body and face. He put out his tongue again and caught one of the dots of cold upon it. It disappeared from his awareness instantly, but he caught another and another. The sensation made him smile. Try to remember back to when you last caught snowflakes on your tongue. I think it's something that everyone who's been in the snow has experienced, and it's a really wonderful, innocent, childlike feeling. One part of his consciousness knew that he was still lying there on the bed in the annex room. Yet another, separate part of his being was upright now, in a sitting position, and beneath him he could feel that he was not on the soft decorated bed covering at all, but rather seated on a flat, hard surface. His hands now held, though at the same time they were still motionless at his sides, a rough, damp rope. And he could see, though his eyes were closed. He could see a bright, whirling torrent of crystals in the air around him, and he could see them gather on the backs of his hands like cold fur. What a great way to describe snow on your hands, cold fur. His breath was visible. Beyond, through the swirl of what he now somehow perceived was the thing the old man had spoken of, snow, he could look out and down a great distance. He was high up someplace. The ground was thick with furry snow, but he sat slightly above it on a hard, flat object. Sled, he knew abruptly. He was sitting on a thing called sled, and the sled itself seemed to be poised at the top of a long, extended mound that rose from the very land where he was. Even as he thought the word mound, his new consciousness told him hill. Then the sled, with Jonas himself upon it, began to move through the snowfall, and he understood instantly that now he was going downhill. No voice made an explanation. The experience explained itself to him. His face cut through the frigid air as he began the descent, moving through the substance called snow on the vehicle called sled, which propelled itself on what he now knew, without the doubt, to be runners. Comprehending all of those things as he sped downward, he was free to enjoy the breathless glee that overwhelmed him. The speed, the clear, cold air, the total silence, the feeling of balance and excitement and peace. Then, as the angle of incline lessened, as the mound, the hill, flattened, nearing the bottom, the sled's forward motion slowed. The snow was piled now around it, and he pushed with his body, moving it forward, not wanting the exhilarating ride to end. Finally, the obstructions of the piled snow was too much for the thin runners of the sled, and he came to a stop. He sat there for a moment, panting, holding the rope in his cold hands. Tentatively, he opened his eyes. Not his snow hill sled eyes, for they had been open throughout the strange ride. He opened his ordinary eyes and saw that he was still on the bed, that he had not moved at all. The old man, still beside the bed, was watching him. "How do you feel?" he asked. Jonas sat up and tried to answer honestly. Surprised, he said after a moment. The old man wiped his forehead with his sleeve. Whew, he said. It was exhausting, but even transmitting that tiny memory to you, I think it lightened me just a little. Do you mean, you did say I could ask questions. The man nodded, encouraging the question. Do you mean that now you don't have the memory of it, of that ride on the sled anymore? That's right. A little weight off this old body. But it was such fun, and now you don't have it anymore. I took it from you. But the old man laughed. All I gave you was one ride on one sled in one snow on one hill. I have a whole world of them in my memory. I could give them to you one by one 1,000 times, and there would still be more. Are you saying that we could do it again? Jonas asked. I'd really like to. I think I could steer by pulling the rope. I didn't try this time because it was so new. The man, laughing, shook his head. Maybe another day for a treat, but there's no time really just to play. I only wanted to begin by showing you how it works. Now, he said, turning businesslike, lie back down. Jonas lay back down. He was eager for whatever experience would come next, but he had suddenly so many questions. Why don't we have snow and sleds and hills, he asked. And when did we in the past? Did my parents have sleds when they were young? Did you? The old man shrugged and gave a short laugh. No, he told Jonas, it's a very distant memory. That's why it's so exhausting. I had to tug it forward for many generations. It was given to me when I was a new receiver, and the previous receiver had to pull it through a long time period too. But what happened to those things, snow and the rest of it? Climate control. Snow made growing food difficult, limited the agricultural periods, and unpredictable weather made transportation almost impossible at times. It wasn't a practical thing, so it became obsolete when we went to the sameness. And hills too, he added. They made conveyance of goods unwieldy. Trucks, buses slowed them down. So, he waved his hand as if a gesture had caused hills to disappear. Sameness, he concluded. Jonas frowned. I wish we had those things still, just now and then. The old man smiled. So do I, he said, but that choice is not ours. But sir, Jonas suggested, since you have so much power, the man corrected him. Honor, he said firmly. I have great honor. So will you. But you will find that it is not the same as power. Lie quietly now. Since we've entered into the topic of climate, let me give you something else. And this time I'm not going to tell you the name of it, because I want to test the receiving. You should be able to perceive the name without being told. I gave away snow and sled and downhill and runners by telling them to you in advance. Without being instructed, Jonas closed his eyes again. He felt his hands on his back. He waited. Now it came more quickly, the feelings. This time the hands didn't become cold, but instead began to feel warm on his body. They moistened a little. The warmth spread, extending across his shoulders, up his neck, onto the side of his face. He could feel it through his clothed parts, too, a pleasant all-over sensation. And when he licked his lips this time, the air was hot and heavy. He didn't move. There was no sled. His posture didn't change. He was simply alone someplace, out of doors, lying down, and the warmth came from far above. It was not as exciting as riding through the snowy air, but it was pleasurable and comforting. Suddenly, he perceived the word for it, sunshine. He perceived that it came from the sky. Then it ended. Sunshine, he said aloud, opening his eyes. Good, you did get the word. That makes my job easier, not so much explaining. And it came from the sky? That's right, the old man said, just the way it used to. Before sameness, before climate control, Jonas added. The man laughed. You receive well and learn quickly. I'm very pleased with you. That's enough for today, I think. We're off to a good start. Pardon me. There was a question bothering Jonas. Sir, he said, the chief elder told me, she told everyone, and you told me too, that it would be painful. So I was a little scared, but it didn't hurt at all. I really enjoyed it. He looked quizzically at the old man. The man sighed. I started you with memories of pleasure. My previous failure gave me the wisdom to do that. He took a few deep breaths. Jonas, he said, it will be painful, but it need not be painful yet. I'm brave, I really am, Jonas sat up a little straighter. The old man looked at him for a moment. He smiled. I can see that, he said. Well, since you asked the question, I think I have enough energy for one more transmission. Lie down once more. This will be the last today. Jonas obeyed cheerfully. He closed his eyes, waiting, and felt the hands again. Then he felt the warmth again, the sunshine again, coming from the sky of his other consciousness that was new to him. This time, as he lay basking in the wonderful warmth, he felt the passage of time. His real self was aware that it was only a minute or two, but his other memory-receiving self felt hours pass in the sun. His skin began to sting. Restlessly, he moved one arm, bending it, and felt a sharp pain in the crease of his inner arm at the elbow. Ouch, he said loudly and shifted on the bed. Ow, he said, wincing at the shift, and even moving his mouth to speak made his face hurt. He knew there was a word, but the pain kept him from grasping it. Then it ended. He opened his eyes, wincing with discomfort. It hurt, he told the man, and I couldn't get the word for it. It was sunburn, the old man told him. It hurt a lot, Jonas said, but I'm glad you gave it to me. It was interesting, and now I understand better what it meant that there would be pain. The old man didn't respond. He sat silently for a second. Finally, he said, Get up now. It's time for you to go home. Why do you think the old man paused? Maybe because he's just easing him into the idea of pain. Maybe he's feeling bad because Jonas is going to have much more pain, and it pains him to have to be the one to give it to him. They both walked to the center of the room. Jonas put his tunic back on. Goodbye, sir, he said. Thank you for my first day. The old man nodded to him. He looked drained and a little sad. Sir, Jonas said shyly. Yes, do you have a question? It's just that I don't know your name. I thought you were the receiver, but you say I'm the receiver, so I don't know what to call you. The man had sat back down in the comfortable upholstered chair. He moved his shoulders around as if to ease away an aching sensation. He seemed terribly weary. Call me the giver, he told Jonas. Sorry, I've got a tickle in my nose. You slept soundly, Jonas, his mother asked at the morning meal. No dreams? Jonas simply smiled and nodded, not ready to lie, not willing to tell the truth. I slept very soundly, he said. I wish this one could, his father said, leaning down from his chair to touch Gabriel's waving fist. The basket was on the floor beside him. In its corner, beside Gabriel's head, the stuffed hippo sat staring with its blank eyes. So do I, Mother said, rolling her eyes. He's so fretful at night. Jonas had not heard the new child during the night, because as always he had slept soundly, but it was not true that he had had no dreams. Again and again as he slept, he had slid down that snow-covered hill, and in the dream it seemed as if there were a destination, a something he could not grasp what, that lay beyond the place where the thickness of the snow brought the sled to a stop. He was left upon awakening with the feeling that he wanted, even somehow needed, to reach the something that waited in the distance. The feeling that it was good, that it was welcoming, that it was significant. But he did not know how to get there. He tried to shed the leftover dream, gathering his schoolwork and preparing for the day. School seemed a little different today. The classes were the same: language and communications, commerce and industry, science and technology, civil procedures and government. But during the break for recreation periods and midday meal, the other new 12s were abuzz with descriptions of their first days of training. All of them talked at once, interrupting each other, hastily making the required apology for interrupting, then forgetting again in the excitement of describing the new experiences. Jonas listened. He was very aware of his own admonition not to discuss his training. But what would have been impossible anyway? There was no way to describe to his friends what he experienced there in the annex room. How could you describe a sled without describing a hill and snow? And how could you describe a hill and snow to someone who had never felt height or wind or that feathery magical cold? Even trained for years as they had all been in precision of language, what words could you use which would give another the experience of sunshine? So it was easy for Jonas to be still and to listen. After school hours, he rode again beside Fiona to the house of the old. I looked for you yesterday, she told him, so we could ride home together. Your bike was still there, and I waited for a little while, but it was getting late, so I went on home. I apologize for making you wait, Jonas said. I accept your apology, she replied automatically. I stayed a little longer than I expected, Jonas explained. She pedaled forward silently, and he knew that she expected him to tell her why. She expected him to describe his first day of training, but to ask would have fallen into the category of rudeness. You've been doing so many volunteer hours with the old, Jonas said, changing the subject. There won't be much that you don't already know. Oh, there's lots to learn, Fiona replied. There's administrative work and the dietary rules and punishment for disobedience. Did you know that they use a discipline wand on the old, the same as for small children? And there's occupational therapy and recreation activities and medications, and they reached the building and braked their bikes. I really think I like it better than school, Fiona confessed. Me too, Jonas agreed, wheeling his bike into place. She waited for a second, as if, again, she expected him to go on. Then she looked at her watch, waved, and hurried toward the entrance. Jonas stood for a moment beside his bike, startled. It had happened again, the thing that he thought of now as seeing beyond. This time it had been Fiona who had undergone that fleeting, indescribable change. As he looked up and toward her going through the door, it happened. She changed. Actually, Jonas thought, trying to recreate it in his mind, it wasn't Fiona in her entirety. It seemed to be just her hair, and just for that flickering instant. He ran through it in his mind. It was clearly beginning to happen more often. First the apple a few weeks before. The next time had been the faces in the auditorium just 2 days ago. Now, today, Fiona's hair. Frowning, Jonas walked toward the annex. I will ask the giver, he decided. The old man looked up smiling when Jonas entered the room. He was already seated beside the bed, and he seemed more energetic today, slightly renewed, and glad to see Jonas. Welcome, he said. We must get started. You are 1 minute late. I apologize, Jonas began, and then stopped, flustered, remembering that there were to be no apologies. He removed his tunic and went to bed. I'm 1 minute late because something happened, he explained, and I'd like to ask you about it if you don't mind. You may ask me anything. Jonas tried to sort it out in his mind so that he could explain it clearly. I think it's what you call seeing beyond, he said. The giver nodded. Describe it, he said. Jonas told him about the experience with the apple, then the moment on the stage when he looked out and saw the same phenomena in the faces of the crowd. Then today, just now, outside, it happened with my friend Fiona. She herself didn't change exactly, but something about her changed for a second. Her hair looked different, but not in its shape, not in its length. I can't quite, Jonas paused, frustrated by his inability to grasp and describe exactly what had occurred. Finally, he simply said, it changed. I don't know how or why. That's why I was 1 minute late, he concluded, and looked questioningly at the giver. To his surprise, the old man asked him a question which seemed unrelated to the seeing beyond. When I gave you the memory yesterday, the first one, the ride on the sled, did you look around? Jonas nodded. Yes, he said, but the snow in the air made it hard to see anything. Did you look back at the sled? Jonas thought back. No, I only felt it under me. I dreamed of it last night too, but I don't remember seeing the sled in my dreams either, just feeling it. The giver seemed to be thinking. When I was observing you before this election, I perceived that you probably had the capacity, and what you described confirms that. It happened somewhat differently to me, the giver told him. When I was just your age, about to become the new receiver, I began to experience it, though it took a different form. With me, it was, well, I won't describe that now. You wouldn't understand it yet. But I think I can guess how it's happening with you. Let me just make a little test to confirm the guess. Lie down. Jonas lay on the bed again with his hands on his sides. He felt comfortable here now. He closed his eyes and waited for the familiar feel of the giver's hands on his back. But it didn't come. Instead, the giver instructed him, call back the memory of the ride on the sled, just the beginning of it when you're at the top of the hill before the slide starts. And this time, look down at the sled. Jonas was puzzled. He opened his eyes. Excuse me, he asked politely, but don't you have to give me the memory? It's your memory now. It's not mine to experience any longer. I gave it away. But how can I call it back? You can remember last year or the year that you were a 7 or a 5, can't you? Of course. It's much the same. Everyone in the community has one generation memories like those, but now you will be able to go back farther. Try, just concentrate. Jonas closed his eyes again. He took a deep breath and sought the sled and the hill and the snow in his consciousness. There they were with no effort. He was again sitting in the whirling world of snowflakes atop the hill. Jonas grinned with delight and blew his own steamy breath into view. Then, as he had been instructed, he looked down. He saw his own hands furred again with snow, holding the rope. He saw his legs and moved them aside for a glimpse of the sled beneath. Dumbfounded, he stared at it. This time it was not a fleeting impression. This time the sled had, and continued to have, as he blinked and stared at it again, the same mysterious quality that the apple had had so briefly, and Fiona's hair. The sled did not change. It simply was whatever that thing was. Jonas opened his eyes and was still on the bed. The giver was watching him curiously. Yes, Jonas said slowly, I saw it in the sled. Let me try one more thing. Look over there to the bookcase. Do you see the very top row of books? The one behind the table on the top shelf? Jonas sought them with his eyes. He stared at them and they changed. But the change wasn't fleeting. It was fleeting. It slipped away the next instant. It happened, Jonas said. It happened to the books, but it went away again. What's he seeing? I'm right then, the giver said. You're beginning to see the color red. So before he wasn't seeing in colors. The sameness made everything black and white. And now he's seeing colors. And that's what happened with the apple and Fiona's hair and the crowd at the ceremony. The what? The giver sighed. How to explain this? Once back in the time of the memories, everything had a shape and size, the way things still do, but they also had a quality called color. There were a lot of colors, and one of them was called red. That's the one you're starting to see. Your friend Fiona has red hair. Quite distinctive, actually. I've noticed it before. When you mentioned Fiona's hair, it was the clue that told me you were probably beginning to see the color red. And the faces of the people, the ones I saw at the ceremony? The giver shook his head. No, flesh isn't red, but it has red tones in it. There was a time, actually, you'll see this in the memories later, when flesh was many different colors. That was before we all went to sameness. Today, flesh is all the same, and what you saw was the red tones. Probably when you saw the faces take on color, it wasn't as deep or vibrant as the apple or your friend's hair. The giver chuckled suddenly. We've never completely mastered sameness. I suppose the genetic scientists are still hard at work trying to work those kinks out. Hair like Fiona's must drive them crazy. Jonas listened, trying hard to comprehend. And the sled, he said? It had the same thing, the color red. But it didn't change, giver. It just was. Because it's a memory from a time when color was. It was, so I wish language were more precise. The red was so beautiful. The giver nodded. It is. Do you see it all the time? I see all of them, all the colors. Will I? Of course. When you receive the memories, you have the capacity to see beyond. You'll gain wisdom, then along with colors and lots more. Jonas wasn't interested just then in wisdom. It was the colors that fascinated him. Why can't everyone see them? Why did colors disappear? The giver shrugged. Our people made that choice, the choice to go back to sameness. Before my time, before the previous time, back and back and back. We relinquished color when we relinquished sunshine and did away with differences. He thought for a moment. We gained control of many things, but we had to let go of others. We shouldn't have, Jonas said fiercely. The giver looked startled at the certainty of Jonas's reaction. Then he smiled wryly. You've come very quickly to that conclusion, he said. It took me many years. Maybe your wisdom will come much more quickly than mine. He glanced at the wall clock. Lie back down now. We have so much to do. Giver, Jonas asked as he arranged himself again on the bed. How did it happen when you were becoming the receiver? You said that the seeing beyond happened to you, but not the same way. The hands came to his back. Another day, the giver said gently. I'll tell you another day. Now we must work, and I've thought of a way to help you with the concept of color. Close your eyes and be still now. I'm going to give you a memory of a rainbow. All right, we will see how this memory training proceeds. Take care. Mwah. Bye, Daddy.